There's a lot of theoretical causes to why people get addicted. Why do I think they get addicted? Because the phenomenon of addiction is exploited in our culture. So there is this phenomenon that naturally happens, which means when we have pain and suffering, we will naturally seek outside of ourselves for relief and pleasure and resolution. And so that's a natural tendency that we would have. But then you have a bunch of organizations or corporations or industries or motives to exploit that phenomenon of addiction, that create products and services and sell them to people and convince people that they need them. So you have the natural drive to sort of, heal and resolve and relieve our suffering.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to another episode of I Love Being Sober, sponsored by Camelback Recovery, Arizona's preferred mental health and addiction treatment option to help newcomers on their path to recovery. If that's you or someone you know, then you're in the right place, because my name is Tim Westbrook, and I'm the CEO and founder of Camelback Recovery here in the always sunny and always sober Phoenix, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have helped thousands of people to stop their suffering and continue on their path to recovery. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Deanne Adamson, the visionary behind Being True to You, an innovative coaching program reshaping the landscape of addiction recovery through their transformational program. With a rich academic and professional tapestry that weaves together mental health counseling, psychology, philosophy, theology, psychotherapy, and personal development, along with her experience in family and child care services and judicial victim advocacy, Deanne brings a unique and holistic approach to addiction recovery. Her foremost goal is to revolutionize addiction recovery by reaching out to the countless individuals battling addiction, leading them into a new era with a dynamic, engaging, and adaptive platform. This platform is designed to be action-focused, yield tangible results, be driven by purpose, stimulate intrinsic motivation, and dismantle the stigma surrounding addiction. Join us as we explore this transformative journey with Deanne Adamson. Deanne, welcome to the show.
Tim, it's great to be back. Thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely. I missed you at the Genius Network annual event. You were there last year, but you weren't there this year. And there were some great guests and great conversations and about 400 people. So I know you had some other stuff going on, but I missed you.
Oh, thanks. I heard about it. I heard it was great. So yeah, I missed it too.
Yeah, definitely. And Anna Lemke, do you know much about Anna Lemke?
A little bit.
So she wrote Dopamine Nation, and I'm just going to throw this out there. She says that the average person lies 2 times per day. And so she talks about just rigorous honesty. And actually, RFK Jr. was also a guest, and he talked about rigorous honesty. And she told a little story about how she catches herself in lies. For example, she tells her kids, "Oh my gosh, there were so many people at the grocery store. I was in line for 20 minutes before I checked out." And then she's like, she catches herself and she's like, "I wasn't in line for 20 minutes. It was like 5 minutes." It's like very like little things like that we lie about, and it's like a crack in the Hoover Dam. It kind of just creates guilt, remorse, even though it's not even a big deal and nobody is really going to be harmed by that little bit of a lie. So anyways, I was just thinking about that, and I'm not sure why.
I think it's surprising that it's only 2 times a day, that the average person lies 2 times a day. I would say that when we're looking at exaggerations and fibs, that it's much more. One of our main values of Being True to You is truth. And on the surface, you think, well, of course I'm a true person. Of course I tell the truth. But look at it with a magnifying glass throughout your whole day, and you start to see all those little white lies and all those little exaggerations. There's quite a bit for all of us to clean up. So
yeah. And you include omissions, right?
No.
Yeah, I know. When she says the average person lies 2 times per day. I agree with you.
Like,
That sounds really low.
probably.
That sounds really low. I don't know where that study came from, but regardless, people lie. And people lie. They
I would
learn to
say
lie as kids.
people lied in the study.
Yeah, I know, exactly. It's like, where was this data coming from? Anyways, okay, so being true to you, I love your coaching program. I love what you're all about. And so we're gonna dig in and I'm gonna ask you a bunch of questions and then we're just gonna have a conversation. So how can individuals best help themselves while on their journey through recovery?
Yeah, it's a good first question. This is what we specialize in and what we do at Being True to You with our coaching program is help people figure out what they can do for themselves. The addiction treatment industry is very expensive and it's very daunting and it's not necessarily inspiring. And a lot of it is just outsourcing people's pain and suffering and problem to other professionals, to other programs, treatments, technologies. And so what we like to look at is what can you do from home? What are things that individuals can do for themselves when they identify an addiction that they would like to change. First thing is to understand that addiction affects all of humanity. It's not something that's just limited to a certain demographic. The phenomenon of addiction is everywhere in so many different ways, from mild to moderate to severe. And so the first thing to recognize is that this is a human phenomenon. It's not something that is unique to each, individual. I mean, it is unique to each individual, but it's affecting everyone. And so I would say there's inner steps that a person could take, and there's outer steps that a person can take. And these are things people can do from within their own home, within their own community, without spending money. And this is things that people would need to do regardless of what program. So even if you are going to go into a treatment program, even if you are going to continue to go through 12 steps, or you find another alternative methodology or something like ibogaine treatment, which is what we have historically helped a lot of people through. Regardless, there are steps that you have to take to get sober. And really, when we look at the statistics and the results of like, what does it take in the end for someone to get sober? These are the things. It's the inner change, right? So some of those inner steps would be, first one is to concede. Just concede to the reality that addiction has happened, accept that it's happened, and accept that it's going to be a process to get out of it. I think that is really the hardest step. I mean, even if you look at 12 steps, the very first step is acknowledging that there's a problem. And I would agree with that. I would agree that somebody really has to own that, accept that, and just take ownership and responsibility for the fact that addiction happened to me like millions and millions of other people. And I want to commit to a process to change. That is a really big step right there. And then after that is a pledge. Make a pledge to change. What is your commitment to change and why? What's really important underneath that's really going to drive those results? And try to make that something that is personal to you. There's a lot of other people that might want you to change and a lot of responsibilities and priorities in life, but what is something that you want for yourself and your life that will drive your recovery? And then in addition to acknowledging it and accepting it, and then making a pledge, something that you can revise as you go, would be to start the work. The inner work is required for everyone in recovery, no matter what. You have to do it. That's what coaching holds accountable, is doing the inner work. And so what you're doing is you're working with the material as it comes up. It could be a craving, it could be a fear, a worry, an anxiety, it could be a conflict, it could be a loss of something, anything really throughout your day that comes up, and you just stop and you say, how did I create or allow this? And what can I do to resolve this and move forward? It's really that intrapersonal work and looking within and improving yourself and character development that is the process of change and recovery. There's a lot of different manifestations of it. And some people, it's going to be more intellectual, some people more emotional, some people more physical, some people more social, cultural. There's a lot of different ways that people get sort of trapped inside of addiction, and all changes in all areas are important. But the heart of it is really going to be that character change. And then I'll give a few more steps externally. So outside of yourself, some things you can do is to build a support team. Start to look around at who you trust. Who are you willing to confide in? Friend, it might be a sponsor, a mentor, a coworker, a personal trainer, of course, a coach, a counselor. But, pull together 3 people, if not more. Maybe you have a bigger community, and identify who's my support team and start to assemble that. That's all things you can do for free, outside of the counselor. And then the strategy would come next. The strategy is something you probably want some kind of accountability partner to work with you on. That's what we do at Being True to You with our coaching, but you could also do it by yourself. Get a whiteboard, get a piece of paper, and write down every place in your life that addiction has a hold of you, just every place. And then write what you can do next to each line, right? So if it has a hold of you because you're going to the bars every night, right? It's like, well, that's going to be a new commitment is I'm no longer going to the bars. I'm going to find a nice tea house or something different to do. And so you just write a whole list of everywhere that addiction is showing up in your mind, in your life. And then next to it, you write one thing you can do to sort of pull you out of that. That starts your recovery plan. And that's really where you get your customized recovery plan, is that you are able to look at the uniqueness of how addiction is holding on to you. And then, this comes the integration. So once you have a plan, start to integrate it. So it doesn't mean you're going to be perfect right away. You have all these ways that addiction has a hold of you, and you have all the ways that you've identified that would be the positive opposite of that. Then starts the daily integration. If my addiction is associated with staying up late, I'm going to start getting up earlier. If my addiction is associated with not exercising, I'm going to get a gym membership, right? And you start to do the opposite of that, and then create a tracking chart. And every day, give yourself like points for everything that you did differently, because really you just want to take a new direction and do things differently. So there's a lot of things that people can do from home for free on their own, or with the help of a coach or a sponsor, that doesn't cost money, that again are the steps a person would have to take regardless of what pathway you go.
What's your definition of an addiction?
Addiction is externalizing your problems and solutions to the external world, whereby you get attached to a particular thing for a feeling or a sense of relief or a particular benefit, and then you become attached to it. It is a progressive condition. It is something that continues to take over your mind and your life more and more. And it is something that eventually you will feel powerless over. So those are some of the things that identify something as an addiction, is it's progressive, and no matter what you do, you can't seem to control the negative consequences or stop the behavior. And some people would say that by definition, addiction is a pattern of relapse, recovery, relapse, recovery. So if somebody were to just step out of a habit and change, it probably wasn't an addiction. Addiction is something that just keeps pulling you back in, and it's full of defense mechanisms in the brain. So denial, deception, deflecting things and projecting things, rationalizing things, making excuses. So it's like a program in the brain. There's a lot of ways it's been defined, but I think of it more as another part of yourself that has developed. It's like when you feed something so much, then that part of you grows and grows, and it develops a mind of its own. And so you have your true self, and then you have this addictive self that's like working with you each day.
Right.
So it's so difficult to overcome because you're in a conflict with yourself. You're fighting yourself. And that's why it's so hard. And
Yeah,
that's
something when I think of addiction, I think of something I do repeatedly despite negative consequences.
Yep.
Whether it's a behavior, whether it's a substance, something I do repeatedly despite negative consequences, and I just can't stop. And to your point, I'm filled with guilt and shame as a result of this behavior or consuming this substance, and I just can't stop. And people that are not addicted or don't have that type of a personality don't understand why the addicted person can't just stop. But it's a process. To your point, it's a process. There's a lot of work that needs to be done for a person to transform into a different person that no longer needs that substance or that behavior to, I guess, feel better. Why do you feel like people become addicted?
Well, I think that there's a lot of theoretical causes to why people get addicted. Why do I think they get addicted? Because the phenomenon of addiction is exploited in our culture. So there is this phenomenon that naturally happens, which means when we have pain and suffering, we will naturally seek outside of ourselves for relief and pleasure and resolution. And so that's a natural tendency that we would have. But then you have a bunch of organizations or corporations or industries or motives to exploit that phenomenon of addiction, that create products and services and sell them to people and convince people that they need them. So you have the natural drive to sort of, heal and resolve and relieve our suffering. And then on top of it, you have our suffering being exploited where there are everywhere you turn, every billboard you look at, every commercial you see, you get on social media, and it's just like, buy this, buy that, buy this. And there's a reality that's being painted for people that's like, oh, plus the standard is higher and higher for what people are to achieve in this life. So the amount of work and productivity and just the standard, the standard operating system that is required to thrive in this world requires people to be awake more, to be more productive, and people can't do it. People's bodies get tired and worn down. And so I think that it's very cultural where we are right now. And I think there's a lot of marketing involved in it. There's a lot of peer pressure. Like I said, the standards are just getting higher. People can't keep up. I mean, I've heard people in college say, not one person in college is not on Adderall. Now, I'm sure it's not true. I'm sure there are people in college not on Adderall, but that's what I have had, my younger nieces and nephews and people in college tell me nobody in college is actually not using drugs. Every single person is using performance drugs, right? And then you get into the career world, same thing. So I think it's a lot of pressure. And I think there's also a lot of suffering underneath. And so to make ends meet, these addictive tendencies are useful in the moment. And then, on top of that, I think that there's a spiritual battle going on behind the scenes. And so again, it's really easy to take advantage of people's desires and attachments and areas of weakness. It's not hard at all. You just put something shiny and feel good in front of them, and then people will just jump right at it. And then eventually that other part of you, that alter ego, develops to such a degree that it's very hard then to tell it no. You have to, just like you built it and grew it and strengthened it, then you have to like cut it off and weaken it and let it die out as it's like crying for attention. So, I mean, there's so many different ways that addiction hooks and traps people. And there's a lot of different contributing factors to why that happens.
I think of Dopamine Nation again. Anna Lemke, she talks about the dopamine hit that people get from all of the different things, from the Facebook like, the Snapchat, the Tinder like, all of the things. So we're in a world filled with dopamine hits, and so we get accustomed to these dopamine hits that without the dopamine hits, that leads to the depression, that leads to feeling low. And so it's just people are searching for more dopamine constantly. I think that's my opinion anyway.
Yeah, it's an intolerance. It's a inability to sit with discomfort. And again, that's how we've sort of been conditioned. I think that if you look back hundreds of years and even decades, there was just a lot of pain in the human experience always. There was always a lot of pain. And then we find ways to soothe ourselves. And then eventually we just get to the point where we feel any kind of discomfort, any kind of pain, and we think something's wrong and we need to escape it or fix it, when really that pain is so precious and that suffering is so precious. I mean, that's really what brings us to our knees and to our spiritual path, is the suffering. And so when we're not dropping to our knees and just feeling whatever it is that we're feeling and allowing ourselves to burn through that emotion without going for that dopamine or, hit them, then we're escaping, we're avoiding, we're numbing, we're not allowing ourselves to actually do the work. We're doing the opposite. We're avoiding the work.
When I think about drugs and alcohol, I think of that's the solution. That's how we numb ourselves, right? So you don't feel. Whereas other things like psychedelics, like ketamine, like any of the other psychedelics, I would say that brings you closer to actually feeling your feeling. And you can give me your opinion on it if you like. And that's kind of my observation, because to your point, the pain and the suffering those are all feelings. And being clean and sober, I get to feel all of the feelings, not just the good ones. And there's a massive gift in getting to feel all of those feelings. There's a massive gift in being brought to my knees and being able to process and being able to cry and being able to be vulnerable and being able to just feel everything. And that's just a beautiful thing. And that's one of the gifts of recovery, in my experience.
And that's why we've continued to do psychedelic preparation and integration, because for me, I very much value the transformational work and the path, and really not, looking for quick fixes or instant gratification, because that's really the trap of addiction initially, right? But then people will say, well, why are you turning to a drug substance to cure a drug addiction? And it is because there is a difference between a psychedelic hallucinogenic medicine and a drug. And so a lot of people would say a drug is something that numbs you and takes
Mhm.
the pain away. And a psychedelic is something that awakens your consciousness and brings you to the center of your pain and sits you right in front of it, and you can't escape. And so I think sometimes it is really hard for us to sit in meditation and just let that difficult experience burn off of us. And so we lock ourselves into a psychedelic experience for 4 to 8 hours, or sometimes longer, depending on what journey it is, because we know that once we're in, we can't get out. And then we will be forced to look at, not just feel the emotion, but actually look at what caused it, which in a lot of cases is ourself. And that's really the hard thing when you're doing the work, is you get to the bottom of it and you're like, oh, I did that. That was me, whether I started it or I perpetuated it or I allowed it to keep going. So yeah, I think that psychedelic therapies can be really helpful in that regard, to take a inventory of oneself and really assess, like, where is my mind at? What is going on in my inner world? What is my inner narrative? What's my dialogue? What are the emotional patterns that both feed my inner narrative and also come from my inner narrative? And then what are the behaviors that are extensions of my thoughts and my emotions? And then my relationships and my habits and my lifestyle, my character, like, how is all of it related? And I do think in a psychedelic experience, especially with some training going into it, that a person can pull apart that web of their own psyche in their own, lifestyle, and just start to look at, what am I doing that is creating the conditions of my life today? And how can I start to pull that apart and put in healthier factors, more protective factors, so I can start to dilute some of these, negative factors that are preventing me from doing the work. I mean, I think psychedelic therapies can be very helpful, although people have found so many molecular combinations that I think people are finding ways to, have a habitual relationship with them, which I think could, in some cases, have the same result that we're trying to avoid, which is the numbing and escaping. But what's
Right.
great is that the conversation is really at the forefront. And when you hear people talking about psychedelics, I mean, a lot of people are having these conversations about how to use them responsibly, and most importantly, how to integrate them.
Right. And I think when I think of, you think of the short game versus the long game. The short
Mhm.
game for the addict, for the alcoholic, for anybody for that matter, is the quick fix to numb, to feel good now. Like, I want to feel good now. And that's the short term solution. The long term solution is to feel good on the other side of it. So that on the other side of it, the guilt and the shame and the remorse and all of the other things on the inside are worked out. And that's why sometimes the psychedelic journey isn't doesn't feel good, because you're working through and you're processing. Then that speaks to the coach. Like, why would someone want to have a coach that's working through one of these journeys, or a series of journeys for that matter?
Yeah, are you saying, why would someone want a coach that's working through, like, has gone through psychedelic therapies?
Why is that important? Because you've got some people that become habitual and they can get to a place where they're numbing out versus actually receiving the gift of what psychedelic therapies are intended for.
Well, I think in general, when you're looking for a supporter and a support team, you want to work with people that understand. So if it's through addiction, it's very helpful to work with someone who understands addiction. I'll just start there, because if somebody doesn't understand addiction, you will go about it in a rational way. When we're trying to, turn bad habits into good habits, we're looking at rationality. We're saying, okay, stop doing that and start doing this. That makes perfect sense. Maybe put a little bit of accountability into it or something like that, but we look at it from a logical perspective. And when we're talking about addiction, it's not logical. It's very illogical. And the way that it works just doesn't make sense to everyday people who haven't really thoroughly been addicted or haven't acknowledged an addiction or haven't really tried to change something that's very, very difficult. And so when you're working with a coach who's been through addiction, they get it. They understand the ups and downs and back and forth and the relapse recovery and how one day you're so committed and you want to change, the next day you're defeated. So it's really important for, your coach, your counselor, your support team to understand addiction. And even if they haven't been through the same addiction as you can point out to them something they're attached to and say, hey, have you ever gone 7 days without coffee or 7 days without TV or 7 days without a cigarette or whatever it is? And oftentimes they'll say, oh, no, I couldn't do that. And you're like, okay, exactly. It's hard. And so, but to your question about psychedelics, it's very difficult to explain a psychedelic experience to someone who hasn't. It would be like trying to explain a dream, to somebody who really has never had a dream before, to explain like what that's like and how weird it can be and how otherworldly it can be and how fragmented it can be and how real it can seem at the same time, right? So it can be difficult to try to explain these states to somebody else. That's why they're ephemeral states, really. They're beyond words. And also, it can be difficult to understand how impactful a psychedelic experience is if you haven't gone through them, to just see the magnificence and the scope of work that a person can do in seeing their greater consciousness and seeing the greater aspects of themselves and their past, present, and future, and their family dynamics and the cultural dynamics and like all of it at once. It's really can be a lot to unpack. And so it's good to work with somebody who understands that, because one, they're going to be able to prepare you for the work. They're going to be able to prepare you for navigation skills, so you know what to do when you're in the experience and you're not just like hugging a pillow in fear the whole time or begging for it to be over, or you create some kind of physical nausea, to where you're throwing up because you're avoiding doing the work, which throwing up doesn't always mean that, right? But these things can happen. Or sometimes people will just get like a really heavy migraine. Something will happen to where they can't participate in the experience because it's too much to bear. But that preparation with somebody who's experienced will help. And then, of course, the integration can be challenging and it can be confusing and it can be disappointing. There's all kinds of stuff that can come up afterward. And so if you're not working with someone that understands it, then they're, again, going to approach the conversation in a practical way that could also discredit the experience or what you went through, or sum it up or cut it short, and miss a lot of the elements that could come from it. So yeah, I would say it's highly significant when you're working with psychedelic therapies and transformational recovery that you're working with people that are experienced.
And I mean, to fully get the advantage of a psychedelic experience, I mean, my understanding is you have the journey, but it's what you do after. It's the actual integration. And if someone, like having someone to help you integrate, is going to be just as important, if not more important, than the actual experience.
Absolutely. I don't think there's anyone that would really argue that. I think most people, even facilitators, will tell you it's all in the integration. And in fact, the psychedelic medicines will tell you that as well. We've heard just countless stories of people coming out and saying the medicine is, telling them you need to go into your life and you need to create these things. The way that I have observed it and the way that I explain it is that the medicines will show you a higher vantage point in your life where your heart is less burdened and your mind is clearer and your spirit is free and happy. And so you can kind of drop into that feeling and that state of knowing to anchor into it. But when you go into your life, you will now have to create that. So the medicine is not going to do it for you. It's going to show you, it's going to open a door, open a window. It might even give you a rest for a couple of months and you're just feeling that pink cloud when you come out and you're just feeling really unburdened and really good and joyous. But ultimately, all of that stuff is going to come back into your life. And so you have to cultivate your mind, your body, your spirit, your life, your relationships, all of these things to get to that state. So it's helpful because, sometimes people haven't felt love or forgiveness or peace or true relief in so long as they can remember, that they don't even know what it feels like anymore. But then you go into an experience and you're just like, wow, like this is what it feels like to not be angry at this or that person, to not hate myself for this or that behavior, to feel happiness about being human and like even getting to look and connect with the opportunity of being human. Like, this is fantastic. And I have not felt this way in so long. And then you come out of the experience, and after a week or a month, some of those feelings, old feelings, come back, and people think, oh, I need to go to the medicine and do another journey. But really, the journey was never going to do the work for you. It just shows you what it feels like. So you remember what it feels like to be a happy, healthy, positive human being, and someone with purpose and someone with passion, somebody who's able to give and someone who's able to be generous. And then when you remember that, you're more driven to integrate it. But yes, absolutely, integration is really where it's at. It's the point of psychedelic medicines. Without integration, I mean, most people would say they are just recreational experiences
Right.
that may offer some benefit, but it is all in the integration where the lasting results come.
Right. It's like you have clarity, and with that clarity, you come up with an action plan, and then you have to take action. And I was thinking about, I had a conversation with Michael Robiello, the owner of Optimize, and people, they go through their psychedelic journey and they're like, oh, I'm looking for the message. And then it's like next weekend, like, oh, I need to find another message. Oh, I'm looking for the message. And some people, they get into the habit of looking for the message, but they're not actually doing anything with the message. And so the importance of taking action, and that's why I think working with a coach would be a good step for anybody that's going to go through any sort of a plant medicine journey or anything like that. What does it take to get and stay sober?
I think in general, it takes taking a new path in life. If you're looking at the true self and the alter ego, and you have two sides to you, essentially with an addiction, you're going to have to identify the path of that alter ego and all of the elements connected and transcend it, which means you're going to have to feed a higher path, the path of your true self. And for most, that is a spiritual path, connecting with God, considering, why am I human? Why am I here? What is my purpose? Did I make a vow for coming here? What am I to fulfill? And what is the meaning of life? I really think that addiction casts a spell over humanity and puts people in a really low state. And so the focus is on human things, and it's a lot of drama, and it's a lot of extra problems that we're constantly creating for ourselves, where we get stuck in issues whereby we just need more addictive substances and behaviors to keep up. So I think, to really permanently transcend addiction and to stay sober is to take up the path of the true self. At Being True to You, in my company, we let people think for themselves on what that means. We orient people around a moral compass and direct people upward, and direct people around core values and virtues like truthfulness, compassion, forgiveness, and patience and forbearance, things like this. And from there, people can cultivate and elevate themselves. And really, what I see underneath chronic states of addiction, depression, anxiety, insomnia, all these chronic states, there's just a mountain that grows bigger and bigger of all these burdens. And so what you have to do is you have to work on every little piece. And so that mountain of stress gets smaller, 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 and smaller. And then you don't have all those symptoms, you don't have all those problems, and therefore you don't have to run toward addictive things, because your life is not so stressful and you're not sitting on all these burdens. And so, those burdens can be traumas that you have to resolve, and they can also be karmas. So there's things that have happened to us, and there's things that we have done onto others in the world. And both of those things really need to be cleaned up. Our mind, our body needs to be cleaned up, our relationships cleaned up, our house and our environment needs to be cleaned up. And so then that just gets easier and easier as you reduce the amount of burden that you're carrying on yourself. And then you elevate to a higher state of consciousness where your body is freer and your mind is freer, and it's easier to find that autonomy and agency to live your life and to find that higher path. But ultimately, that's what I would say to get and stay sober, is you have to find that higher path. And that higher path comes with purpose and a mission. And when you have a mission to serve that is not connected to the mission, inside of your addiction per se, you're leveling up. That's really what you need. And then you just have to let that other part of yourself die out. And I think that's what's really hard for people. There's a lot of people that have told me over the years that their addiction is their best friend. And when I started hearing that, I just thought, oh my gosh, it's so true. I saw a meme the other day. It was a person walking with a little cannabis bud holding its hand. And it was like, don't forget the friendship we had. And it just kind of laugh because I was like, we beat up on ourselves for these addictions so much and these substances, but really that experience did provide a lot of security and reassurance and relief and meaning to a person's life. And so I think there's also a grieving process that can happen, when you start to let that other side of you die out, because it is really challenging. But yeah, you have to level up to the next level. And I think just wake up to what's going on in the world. I think the more that you wake up to what's going on in our country and other countries behind the scenes, the more you see this targeted attack that's manufactured. I mean, these addiction epidemics are not happenstance. They are fully manufactured. Like I said, exploiting the phenomenon of addiction that already exists, but then you can take advantage of vulnerable people at vulnerable times, and you can sell them pretty much anything. And you can embed it into culture, at the level of children. I mean, look at all these children on screens, at a couple years old. And so we're embedding these habits into our society right when a child is born. And so I think once you get old enough and you start to see these agendas and all of these manufactured advertisements that have gone out in any number of ways, gosh, we could do a whole podcast on this, then you start to feel empowered, because you're like, I want to take my power back. Like, I want to figure out why I'm here and what my purpose is. And I could say that was a big part of my journey as well. And with a lot of clients I've worked with, once they understand, I'm being overly medicated, I'm being drugged. Now there's drugs like fentanyl and carfentanil coming on the market that are just to kill. It's not really to create a client base. It's really just killing people. And so once you understand like what's behind it, then you feel motivated because you don't want to fall for it anymore. So I think you're leveling up and you're seeing the truth of what's happening and how our culture is spellbound underneath these forces. And then all of a sudden, I think psychedelics too will help just break through it. And you see this prison or matrix that's going over the people to control consciousness and behavior. And then you realize, I don't want to be controlled. I'm a sovereign being. I'm a being of God. I'm a spiritual being. I'm a soul in a human body here to fulfill my own inner cultivation and to help others. And I can't do that when I'm under the spell of these addiction forces. And these awakenings in and of themselves can just take you to a higher level, and you find new motivation and new drive and new purpose. And then followed by that, new friends, new places to hang out, new things to do.
Everything has to change. So I was at the psychedelic conference in Phoenix, and you, being true to you, was there as well. I heard a lot about death of the ego liberation, and David Drishke, an owner of an ibogaine clinic in Mexico, talked about ego death. And I hear that in the room, in the 12-step rooms too, ego, edging God out. Mm-hmm. What's your opinion, or how important is it to, I guess, push the ego aside for someone to stay sober?
It's not a terminology that I use of being true to you. I think about it as the true self and the false self. I think the ego can be confused with our main consciousness. So we have our main consciousness that we really want to strengthen. So I like to focus on strengthening the voice of the true self and the heart of the true self and figuring out what that is. And I think sometimes that's confused with the ego, and people just don't understand what they're supposed to get rid of. I mean, the ego is our everyday consciousness. However, where that can become difficult is when we have defenses, and our defenses are what block us from change. And that's what you could think of as armor. And so I think when I think of ego and the bad parts of it, it's like the armor that is protecting our addictive self that we won't let anyone get through. And that armor is made up of rationalizations, excuses, projections, anger, like emotion in general, resistance, right? And so distraction, sarcasm, like really having fun, like there's just so many things. And so if you are in recovery and you're wanting to do the work and you're asking for help, but when your coaches and your support team, your mentors, sponsors, your family, your friends, your significant other, when they try to talk to you and give you feedback and you're just like, no, like I got it, and you're blocking them at every turn, that's when they're like, just drop your ego, right? So that's what people are saying is like, let me in, let me get to your heart, let me get to that spot of vulnerability and humility. And I think it's just a process that takes time, because you need to be in a place where people have compassion for you and you have compassion for yourself. You need to be in a place there isn't judgment and where you feel safe to show the true nature of what your addictive self has created. And then in that place, then it's easier to put those defenses down. I think if we just go around constantly saying, let go of your ego, let go of your ego, I don't think it's clear enough what to do or what people mean by that. In essence, they think they mean get vulnerable, be humble, like let people see the truth, or let yourself see the truth so that we can get through all this armor. So for us being true to you, I think it's more about connecting with the true self and then identifying like an onion, right? All the layers that I've put around my pain and my suffering and my areas of weakness, because I don't want to be judged for them and I don't want to be shamed for them. So I'm protecting myself. And so it's a process and it's going to take a lot of compassion. So anytime people are accusing other people of having too much ego, it's like, well, let's look at ourselves. Are we creating a container for those people to feel safe and comfortable to actually put down, those layers? What do you think, Tim? I'm curious what you think about that.
Well, I think the ego is there to protect, like my ego is there to protect me. And being humble, I have to put my ego aside in order. And I think I like you talk about connecting with the true self. I think the only way to connect to the true self is if someone puts their ego aside and they're able to really connect, be vulnerable, be open, be honest. And I mean, there's lots of examples, but I mean, like right now, for example, I'm going through some tough times in business and personally. I've got some stuff going on. And so my ego wants to look good. My ego wants to say, yeah, everything's great, Deanne. It's really good to see you. We're crushing it. Really, I'm going through some stuff. And so I can be vulnerable without being a victim. Without being a victim, it's like, hey, I'm going through some things right now. It's pretty rough. I'm excited to get to the other side of it. And I know that this too shall pass and things are happening for me, not to me. My ego doesn't want to let you in. So my ego is there to protect me.
And I think what could agree with what you're saying. I think what could be helpful for individuals and when we're supporting others is to be clear of the defense mechanism that is egoic, that is blocking. So if you were to say, I wonder what it would be like if you let that excuse go, or that limiting belief go, or that resistance go, and use a terminology that is more specific than ego, then a person can kind of identify that. If someone just says, oh, you have too much ego, a person might not understand that. But if you say, every time I talk to you about this particular thing, I feel like you are demonstrating defensiveness, like use a specific word, then I think it helps people to identify, oh, okay, that's what they mean by ego. Because I think we kind of make ego so wrong all the time. We're like wanting to like shove it aside. But I understand, like, edge God out, it just kind of shows that we're thinking too much in our head and we're not really like connecting with our true self, with God, and we're separated. We're letting that alter ego run the show, that outer persona.
It's like the ego creates a shell. I mean, it creates a shell. It's a protective armor. And I don't want to let people in. And I don't want to be vulnerable. And I don't want to be humble. And I want to look good. I want to sound good. I don't want to let people in. And that's what I think of when I think of ego. That's what I'm thinking of right now. Anyways.
Yeah. What is the greatest feeling too is when people discover that they get more love, more recognition when they do put their ego down, and when they do get vulnerable, because it's very scary. But when you actually can get into a place where you're ready and prepared to share something and say something, you will see that more people open up and that you get actually often more support, more recognition, more validation for being honest. But we don't think that. We think we'll be unloved and rejected if we share these things. So of course it just depends on who, with, and where.
What recovery model all about?
The transformational recovery model is something that we discovered working with psychedelic therapies and helping people before and after. And I would say that by definition, it is using states of suffering and symptoms and addictions as an access point into the work whereby you are transforming one thing at a time. So with transformational recovery, you are finding whatever comes up on a daily basis. It could be thoughts, it could be of emotions, and it could be of behaviors or character traits. There's a lot of different ways that the work shows up but what you're doing is you're transforming it. So if I have jealousy come up and it's really strong, I'm not projecting that onto other people. I'm stopping and I'm like, I've never felt jealousy before. This is a new emotion. I'm sitting with it. I'm understanding it. I'm getting to the root attachment underneath it or the shortcoming underneath it, and I'm transforming it at its core. And then I go on to the next thing. I'm going about my day. And then, I realize I snap at somebody and I'm like short with them. Do that. I didn't mean to be edgy with this person. It's not their fault. So I stop and I think, okay, why did I do that? And I trace it all the way back. And I'm like, okay, well, it's been, 2 weeks since I've even exercised or gone outside. I've been, working. I have all these problems stacking up I'm not solving. This makes perfect sense. I'm not taking time for self-care. Okay, solve this problem. And then you go to the next one. And so with transformational recovery, it's that idea I was sharing before of we have a mountain of burdens we've collected over a lifetime, if not many lifetimes, and those burdens are just like stacking up higher and higher. And so to actually improve ourselves and to reduce our suffering and to beat addiction is to reduce that mountain of burdens. And so you're just taking it one step at a time and you're transforming it. And by transforming each aspect of ourself, we're actually elevating ourselves. That's really what transformational recovery is all about, is you're doing the work for yourself. You're looking within, you're finding your shortcomings, you're finding your limiting beliefs, you're finding your areas of weakness, you're finding those character traits that are faulty, like always showing the blade, not being reliable, not keeping your word, not telling the truth, as we started talking about. And you start to say, I want to transform that stuff. I want to be a person that's on time. I want to be a person that's patient. I want to be a person that tells the truth. I want to be a person people can rely on. And so you're transforming yourself from the inside out. And we have found that that's the process of recovery, no matter what path you take. So might as well just start doing the work, right? And then with our transformational coaching program, with Being True to You, we've been running our coaching program since 2010. And what we do is we have a lot of coaches at this point. And so we can pair everyone with the best match coach, and they're going to guide and hold accountable that process. Because going back to the ego, our ego likes to come back in and cover up the situation and say, oh, it's not that bad. There's not that many problems. You fixed enough. Like, just stop doing the work. Go back to having fun now. And so it's nice to have a coach because they're going to keep that conscious conversation going with you week after week, month after month, really ensure that you do the work, because it is a long process, really. And many people say it's just a lifetime process of us constantly integrating and cultivating things. But a coach can, hold those things accountable to make sure that you stay true to your original pledge and to your original commitments.
What do you mean? You talk about incremental changes. What do you mean by incremental changes? And can you give me an example as it relates to transformational recovery?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I'll start with a metaphor, which is take the stairs, not the elevator. So oftentimes when people get sober, especially out of like a psychedelic treatment like ibogaine, and sometimes out of rehab, people want to fix their life immediately. They want to go to the top. They want to have their house back, their car back, their relationships back, their health back. They just want everything overnight. And they sometimes can do that, especially if they have enough money or family helping them. But what we have seen is that when you try to do that, one little slip will take you to the bottom. So if you try to take the elevator to the top, any kind of hiccup in your life, you're going to have that, immediate drop and you're going to go back to ground zero. And so we have found that it's better to take the stairs in this line of work because then you're solidifying every stair. So every time you get to the next floor, you're not going to just fall down a whole floor because you've built yourself up, and then you go to the next floor, the next floor. And so when you have those hiccups and you have a setback, what happens is that you're just falling back a few steps. You're not falling to the bottom anymore. And so those incremental changes is really just chunking it down and making it manageable and doing it right. If you were going to build a house, same thing. You have to have every nail and screw and board and fixture has to be perfectly placed in order for that house to stand strong. And so some examples of like incremental changes could be starting with a morning routine, getting up earlier. Maybe the night before you put your, workout shoes and your workout clothes right next to your bed. You have an alarm set. Maybe you have like a fresh bottle of water right there for you. And you wake up and it's like, oh, first thing, there's my exercise clothes and my water, right? and you got your toothbrush and everything set up. And so maybe that's something you've never done, and all of a sudden that's a change. Or maybe another incremental change could be, I'm going to take off social media off my phone for 6 months. I'll have it on my computer. I can still check, but I'm going to take it off my phone so that I can't be looking at it, during the day. And so that could be an incremental change. Making an appointment to talk to family once a week, or somebody that's very good for you to check in with, or that weighs on you if you're not checking in with them, right? Like, it could be parents, it could be anyone. And so you're like, okay, from now on, every week I'm going to call my parents at 7 o'clock on Sunday nights and do a 20-minute FaceTime with them. It could be switching out a Starbucks coffee for a protein smoothie. So there's lots of little incremental changes you could do. I would say for addiction recovery, some things to think about right off the bat would be house rules. I think that's a really good one. Doing a purge of different parts of your house. So you're purging like the living room and then the kitchen, the bathroom, the closet. So you're going through and you're cleaning it up, and then you put house rules into place to maintain it. And so these can be things that give you a metric and structure for some of the changes that you want to make. And then just in general, removing bad things and adding good things. So in the beginning of the call, I was saying, you can strategize every place that addiction has you hooked. You really got to be creative, because there's a lot of different ways that it can hook you. And then you're looking at all the positive opposites. So if you make that list, then, you're going to start to see various micro changes that you can make, right? So I'm going to take out the Snicker bars that I just love so much, and I'm actually just going to get a little dark chocolates with peanuts. It's almost the same thing, but it's a little bit different. It's a little bit better, right? Or the hour I spend on video games every day, or social media games or something, I'm going to read a book. And so some people even like to go smaller and say, I'm going to read 1 page every single day of my book, because if we just do 1 page, it's enough to get the mind to say yes, but usually the person will end up reading 5 or more pages. So it doesn't really matter how incremental things are. I would say just like catching yourself in the moment when you're working on things. Communicate with people like, hey, I want to work on my patience a little bit more. I know I've been edgy. Please give me grace while I do this. And then if you find yourself being edgy, you just stop. You say, hey, I'm so sorry I said that. I'd like to take that back. I'm really working on that. So I think it's like those little changes too in your personality, catching yourself. Those little white lies or exaggerations. You say, I've been standing in line for 20 minutes. And then you say, actually, it was 5 minutes, but it felt like 20 minutes. So I think that the incremental changes are really where it's at. And sometimes big changes are very much needed too. So not to take away from that, but you can make those big changes when you need, but still it's all the incremental micro changes around the big changes that are going to make it stick.
Well, and I think about BJ Fogg and his book, Tiny Habits.
Yep.
And it's like, if you want to start exercising, your tiny habit or your goal can be to do 1 push-up. Your goal can be to read 1 page, like your example. You read 1 page, you're probably going to read more than 1 page, but it's just creating that habit of doing something that's so minor, but you can achieve it and you feel good because you followed through with what you said you were going to do. I think of myself when I first got sober, it's like I do a gratitude list every single day. I hit my knees in the morning and I pray. I go to a meeting every single day. I call my sponsor every single day. So those are just the little things that I did. And today I have a pretty robust morning routine that includes lots of things, and it takes me an hour to do. At that time, it probably would have been too much to do that. So I like the incremental changes, and it's backed up by BJ Fogg and his book and all of the work that he's done in behavioral change. What are tips to help others?
Yeah, so I think a lot of times when people think about addiction, it's kind of an exhausting subject matter, because a lot of times we don't know what to do. It seems like we're up against a endless battle. And so one of the things that we value training our professional coaches and our team and talking about and being true to you is how to support others. We offer coaching to families, and we offer companion training to families as well that are supporting loved ones through addiction. So yeah, I would love to share some tips here. I think that one of the things to note is that it's really counterintuitive, like how you support other people through things. Oftentimes, the way that we think that people need help is not the way that they really need help. So, supporter out there and you're listening, you could take some notes on this, and certainly you can call us as well. I would say there's so many things I can go over, so I'll just name a few things. So, compassion is really important. if you want to help somebody, you really have to get into a heart-centered space, and you have to get into a place of compassion, because if you don't, that's when people are going to lie and hide, and you're going to become really frustrated. And that's when you're going to say stuff like, you're just not ready yet, and you don't take this seriously, and you don't care about your life. And that's when all those statements come out. But really, the person does care. They do want to change. They want help. They're just looking for a place to feel safe. And what they mean by safe is a place they feel loved and a place they feel compassion. And so if you're not in that place, you're not really suitable for a supporter at that moment. And that's okay, because for family, we get burnt out. We can't really support each other. But if we are going to support each other, we need to have that love and compassion, and be able to put ourselves in someone else's shoes and just think, what has it been like for them in their life, and that led them to this point, and how hard it must have been, and how difficult it must be now to really ask for help. So compassion is something that has to be cultivated inside of yourself. You have to let go of your judgments toward the person and just really let them show up how they are, and just love them, you know? The next would be building an alliance with them. If you're not in somebody's circle of trust, you're not going to get very far with them. And so building an alliance means having conscious conversations with somebody, looking them in the eyes, pointing at their heart, speaking to their true self, not speaking to the addict. Don't speak to the addict at all. Just don't even acknowledge that side of the person. Don't ask them how much they're using, how often, the severity of their drugs. Sometimes there are situations we have to do that, but try to avoid that and just speak to the true self and what they're going through, what pain they're facing, what their goals are, what they're working toward, versus trying to get into the nitty-gritty of all their symptoms and all their drug use or, addictive behaviors. It's not so helpful. Basically, you want to get on the same team as them, and you want them to feel that they're in your corner. That's something that I always used to do when I was coaching a lot, is just say, I'm in your corner. And that feels good to people, like, wow, because a lot of times they don't feel that way. They feel everyone is against them, whether that's true or not, they do. The next thing is autonomy. It's important to give people a sense of individuality and agency in their life. If we want them to take responsibility for themselves, well, let's give them some autonomy. So even if you know what they need to do and they're not necessarily making the best decisions, it's still helpful to find ways that you can support them in identifying what they want for themselves. And if you're having compassion and you really are in their circle of trust, they probably will listen to some of your recommendations. But you have to understand that someone coming out of an addiction needs to feel in control. And addiction is a control state. And so that's why they're addicted, is they don't feel in control of their life. And so that's the one thing that they can control that no one else can control. So autonomy is really important. And then I would say empowerment, any way that you can empower them, getting them information, educating them, connecting them with sources that they can feel like they're growing, they're maturing, that they're well informed, inspiring them, talking up to them, uplifting them. These are really important things. Adding value. When you're a supporter, you have to think about, how does the person need support and how do they want support, and give them support in that way if you can. You don't have to do anything you don't want, but oftentimes supporters are giving and giving and giving and giving, and it's not useful to the person. It's not what they're wanting. What they're wanting is something different. And so you really have to listen to them and find a compromise so that the support that you're giving is actually supportive. So that's a really big one, and I would say kind of a tough one. Finding leverage is really good. There's lots of positive ways to leverage things, right? Let's say you're trying to help your best friend get sober and you guys used to go snowboarding all the time. Take them out snowboarding. You're leveraging something that they love, something that they used to love. You're leveraging the friendship that you have with them. And so you're positively saying, hey, I want to get out there. Let's do a snowboarding trip. And you get them away from, their drug culture and what they're doing, and you take them into another place. So any way that you can leverage change or a sense of urgency, there's a lot of ways to leverage in good ways. So don't have too much time to talk about that. What I'll end with is, you want to have a good agreement with people if you're going to support them. So it doesn't matter if you're a paid professional or you're a mother or you're a spouse or, whatnot. You still want to have an agreement of what kind of support you can give, what your expectation is, and where your boundaries are. Never give more than you can give. If you are getting resentful, it's your fault because you're giving too much. and the boundaries aren't clear. And that's really where the breakdown comes in most support relationships, is that the supporter's like, I'm giving and giving and giving, and you're not using it. But we have to confirm that the support that we're giving, that they want and that they are going to use, and that they can meet your expectation and that they're willing to. And then the consequences need to be clear too. So I'm able to help you in this way if you can show up in these ways. So as a coach, right, I would say to a client, okay, I can coach you for 3 months. I'm going to do 12 sessions in 3 months. I can coach you if you show up to every coaching session on time for 12 weeks straight. That will be my criteria. I don't care about your progress. I don't care how well you're doing. You just have to make those calls and I'll keep going, right? So that might be a coach's criteria for them to continue. And then the client can say, okay, I can do it. I can do 12 sessions, 12 weeks in a row. I can commit to that. And then the coach is not going to become bitter because I'm giving exactly what I said I was going to give. And so
Right.
is the client, right? So you just kind of want to have those expectations laid out and be really clear about things and not support beyond what you can support. And then just help people with the next move, just focus on the next step, talking about incremental changes. You don't want to get too far ahead where the person is just going to sort of think, I can't do this and give up. Just focusing on the next step. So there's a few things to mention.
Love it. We're coming to the end of the interview. Is there a question that you wanted me to ask you today?
No, I can just talk a little bit about what we do at Being True to You as a closing, unless there's anything else you want to talk about, Tim.
No, tell me about your coaching program, your coaching training program. Where can people find you? How can they learn more about Being True to You?
Would love to. So yeah, Being True to You is a company I started in 2010. It's such a beautiful company and community that we've created. We do preparation and integration coaching for people through transformational experiences. So if you're an individual and you're going through addiction or other chronic state of suffering and you really want to chip it away at it and you want to find true resolve and really get on the path of your true self and do that deep work, you can get paired with a Being True to You coach, and we can support you in early recovery, new recovery, and long-term recovery, or recovery from anything, whether it's addiction or not. And if you're a clinic as well, if you're a clinic supporting people through these things, we do before and after care for clinics. So we can build a little coaching team around your program to extend the services out to clients and their families before they come in and after they leave. And then our coach training program. Our coach training program is something very special. I started that a decade ago in 2013. So we've been running it for a long time, and it has really shaped up to be something quite remarkable. We have professionals of all kinds coming from all over the country and different parts of the world to come through the training because it's so unique. And the training is specifically a transformational recovery and psychedelic integration coach training program that I would say mostly just centers around this transformational work that I was talking about, how to look at the larger human experience, the predicament of the human experience, the existential crisis that everyone's under, not pathologizing what we go through, actually normalizing it and just using it as, access points into the work so that we are leveling up through our human suffering. We're not going down, we're actually leveling up. So whether you're a professional already working in your career or whether you're looking to get into this space, you could check out our training. We have trainings that start in March and September. We're taking enrollments for our spring training. So definitely call us at 833-379-0070, or you can email us at coaching@beingtruetoyou.com, or you can just check out beingtruetoyou.com. We also have Facebook and Instagram and a Gongjing World account as well. So check us out there, and we would love to hear from you. Just hear your story and whether you need support yourself or whether you want to become a supporter and help make a difference in a world full of addiction and depression and mental health epidemics. There's a lot of room for people to come in and start helping in this way. So thank you so much, Tim.
Yeah, awesome. And we at Camelback Integrated Health and Wellness, we use Being True to You. We use their coaching program for people that are going through our ketamine-assisted therapy program. And so we've seen positive results. And Deanne, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate you, and thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
That does it for my time today with Deanne Adamson. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of I Love Being Sober.
Mhm.
If you found this video to be of value, be sure to like it, subscribe to our channel if you want to see more videos, leave a comment if you have a question, if you've got something to say. Camelback Recovery provides treatment services for people struggling with mental health, mental illness, addiction, alcoholism. So if you or someone you know is struggling, be sure to reach out to us. You can go to our website, camelbackrecovery.com, or our information is in the comment section below. And we provide everything from detox, inpatient, outpatient treatment, sober living, recovery coaching, sober companion services. So either we'll be able to help you or we'll be able to refer you to people or treatment centers that might be a better fit. So I will see you in the next video.